You just heard the Spectral Sons of Mictlan, The Scars of My Journey from Processions of the Infraworld from the Chasm. This is the Chasm Part 2. I'm Mark.
I'm Jason. And hopefully you just finished the Chasm Part 1, I imagine. So if this works right, or you took a break because you needed to mentally wrap your head around this stuff a little.
It's understandable. So. But we thought we'd actually give you a second intro this time instead of just blasting you with music.
Yeah. A lot of times what has happened in the past for people that always wonder is sometimes Mark will be like, I had to split such and such into two parts because especially some of your old equipment wouldn't handle it.
Yeah, you couldn't process shit like that.
We didn't really prepare for a second part. And so it would just sort of end at a place and then begin at a place. And you're just like, okay. And
I'd put whatever you heard for the last song, I'd bring it on to the second part and you could hear it again.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't plan for it. So this time we actually were like, let's plan ahead. And there you go. Have an outro and then an intro and all that kind of good stuff. But just two, Procession and Infraworld we talked about at the end of part one there. And just those are two bangers that open the whole album up. So I was like, let's open up the show with that. We don't need to talk too much about the songs that kind of speak for themselves. But you get a great kind of fully formed instrumental. Again, we talked about the instrumentals with the incantation and some of that stuff. And instrumentals are going to play a huge, huge role in part 2. So be prepared. So this is kind of where we're at. And so we're around the year 2000 and they are on Dwell Records, at least up to this point. And then things start to change a bit. And kind of wanted to start with this Metal Maniacs interview from another issue from 2002, all right, with Adrian Bromley. It's got Superjoint Ritual on the cover. And he's basically kind of commenting a little bit in this interview on the relationship with Dwell and why they're going to kind of go labelless and what they're going to sort of do with this kind of follow-up EP called Reaching the Veil of Death. And so I'll just I'll share some thoughts, and some of this is Adrian's commentary kind of mixed in, so it's kind of interwoven. So it says, it would take an atomic bomb to blow the Chasm singer guitarist Daniel Corchado out of the metal scene, maybe 2 atomic bombs. Corchado, a dedicated metalhead whose Chicago-based the Chasm is heralded by many metalers as the true purveyors of raw, dark death, has seen a lot of personal and professional shit. Yet he carries on. The Chasm self-financed limited edition, 1,500 copies, 5-song Reaching the Veil of Death is a blistering onslaught of intensity, brooding evil, darkness, packing one hell of a wallop. Listening to the new EP, it's disturbing to realize the Chasm was forced to release such a paramount effort independently with no label backing. So here's Daniel. I think all of this goes back to when we were on Dwell with Procession to the Infraworld. We were getting a killer response, but never got to the next level. We didn't get recognition where we could tour. The label didn't give us a lot of support. I also think a lot of people didn't ask for the Chasm to be on the road. The sales were pretty decent and the reviews were excellent, but I think the problem is that we are too mellow for brutal fans and too complicated for the old school freaks. We are right in the middle of things, and that shows in our sales. I think the main reason a label hasn't shown interest in us is because we're playing metal music that doesn't really go along with what labels are trying to push right now. So I'm going to pause there. What are your thoughts on that? This idea of being kind of in the middle of too mellow for brutal and too complicated for old school. Is that kind of like the Chasm in a nutshell?
I think so.
Yeah.
There were it's a lot of those bands too that you don't have the same opportunities where, you can even get a demo out in time, but you've been around the whole time. These guys have been around for fucking ever. But I think the restrictions, limitations of what you can do, it even go back to Repulsion. They were doing stuff by 86 that nobody else was, but we didn't hear about it till 89. Yeah. That's a real common thing in metal. Go back to Exodus. They should have been right there with everybody else, but they were, a couple years behind.
Well, that was a major theme of the Misfits show, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
About what if Static Age had actually come out in, 78,
Yeah.
Holy shit.
That would have been
right there.
Totally changed history.
Yep, absolutely. So, but he goes on, he says, I'm too old for this shit. He spits in disgust. I don't want to go out and beg for a record deal. fuck that. I honestly don't see labels giving much support to us. I don't think they care what we do. I've learned my lesson from all of this. When we were on Dwell, we thought we were going to get bigger, but it never happened. We believe in what we do, so we decided to just do it ourselves. This is called getting fed up with no one giving a shit. Corchado agrees. I got very disappointed with all these labels who had approached us over the last little while and then just forgot about us. I was always trying to contact those interested, but never got anywhere. We put all of that to the side and decided to just record this EP. So I think, you get a sense, and the whole rest of this interview is really full of vitriol. Like, it's the most, like, he's just like pissed. He's just angry, and I think whatever happened with this Dwell deal, and them, I think, feeling like they were kind of near the peak of their powers, like Procession, the Infraworld had more exposure. They played Milwaukee Metal Fest in '99. I think they were kind of, tout it a little bit there. I can't remember if we watched them. I might not have known much about them to care. Maybe Brian did.
I don't think I did.
But yeah, it kind of bums me out now because I'm like, fuck. And I guess they played Maryland, fully formed, the Chasm in 2019, I guess, the last Maryland before COVID hit. I'm like, damn.
I don't think I went to that one.
No. Yeah. So again, I'm kind of bummed because who knows? It might just be like, just missed opportunities, like ships passing in the night, kind of missed each other here and there. But
yeah.
So that's kind of what's kind of going on here. So they end up creating a label, the Lux Inframundus, to put out this EP. It had actually been like recorded in 2000 officially, but I don't think it actually truly sees the light of day until like 2002, so they redo the Grave Fields, which is a song from the Lost Years, and then they do a Bulldozer cover, which was do you know Bulldozer, like an Italian?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of black and speed metal band. Yeah, so it was pretty cool. But the song we're gonna play from this EP to kind of get affairs kind of moving here is the title track, and whoo, that opening riff is an all timer on Reaching the Veil of Death. I mean, they came to play. It's just kind of
the chugga is in full effect.
Oh God, it's thrashy black metal bathed. I said bathed equally in Sweden as in Florida. So it's like this. It's got even like a kind of like a Dreaming in Red, Dismember, Left Hand Path kind of moody part around.
Totally. I put the Hero Walking into the Sunset solo.
Yeah, there it is. Yep.
Then run to the next obstacle, because at the end of the solo, the song should be done, but then it's like, oh, here we go. Let's keep going.
And that's kind of what I feel like. There's like a slower kind of like almost grinding kind of bolt thrower riff that appears a couple times. I think at the beginning and near the end too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's the chugga chugga. The chugga chugga blaster.
Chugga chugga. Yeah. How do you? It's like that bolt thrower riff is like what? It's like almost like it's like tanks just like rolling thunder, or whatever.
Yeah, you're just hearing like the tracks of tanks going over rocks and breaking or something.
Exactly.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. So there you go, Andreas, for your birthday. We're talking about bolt thrower.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Yeah. But I mean, it just sounds really passionate, really textured. It's just it's a really fucking kick-ass tune, And so and that's kind of like what gets us to where we're at. And then around that time, they are kind of again seeking out a new label, and I can't remember. Did I write down who? Oh, this is when they signed with Witch's Brew. All right, which is going to be another disaster for them. Because kind of as I mentioned before.
Well, we talked about Witch's Brew was the German label, right?
This is the German label, yeah. So this is when they start working on the 2002 Conjuration of the Spectral Empire. And like I said, that's not going to go well for the band either, which again, I feel like real like shit luck, at all times. And there's a kind of a badass kind of tidbit from the interview before we move on to this, talking about this record. I found another interview. I think it's called Chronicles of Chaos. And it's with a guy called Paul Schwartz. And before we left that Reaching the Veil tune, I wanted to sort of throw this out there. And Paul Schwartz, the guy that's interviewing Daniel here from this Chronicles of Chaos zine from back in the day, he points out how the song opens like super powerful and then explodes in this incredible solo and melodies, which you and I just got done talking about. And he points out how unusual it was to have these kind of melodies and harmonies kind of mixing together in death metal. And Daniel says this, I thought it was pretty insightful. It's just natural. But the aspect of the melody, and when you hear that feeling, it comes from totally like Iron Maiden and stuff like that. Actually, that solo in Reaching the Veil of Death, I wanted to do something like fucking Dave Murray or something like that. I didn't want to be Iron Maiden, but I was like, fuck. I mean, we're death metal, of course, but metal, just the pure meaning of the word. So right now, it's like we have nothing to lose, right? I mean, we do this or that. Who's going to care? I mean, who's going to be like, oh, you guys suck. You won't sell more copies. You're just down in the scene. So anyways, I just thought the little Dave Murray part was just pretty interesting. Because
nobody talks to Dave Murray. I like to hear him. Yeah, I don't know if I would have either, but it's nice to hear that people appreciate Dave for his arpeggios.
Trying to do that,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when you get back to this conjuration of the Spectral Empire, I think it kind of gives you some insight into where the Chasm is going to sort of move into the future. 3 instrumentals, all right, which will become more common over the next kind of several releases.
Yes, say the least.
More epic. I wrote Maiden and Manila Road, Sirathon Ghoul elements that begin really being interwoven into the sort of brutal, melodic, complex death metal. Mm-hmm. Lots of those weird harmonic, atmospheric guitar parts that I associate with, Satyricon, Thorns, Inquisition, or as you said, the Freezing Moon kind of mayhem kind of riff, for lack of a better term. And so that's kind of where we get with this record. I guess I said the 2 tunes that we're going to pick out here, and we're going to hear something from this record at the very end of the episode, and I'll explain why when we get to that point. But, you've got this kind of album opening tune that's kind of an instrumental called Deathcult Arrival. And I just thought like that's kind of perfect because it harkens back to past albums and things like that.
Sounds like a Dima Borger EP.
It does. I know. What the fuck is that EP?
Deathcult Armageddon.
Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah. We didn't have an embossed cover from Andreas Marshall. Was it embossed?
Maybe.
A little bit. The EP. Yeah.
Everything was either like tits or tentacles.
One, I think it's just an Andreas Marshall one. I think it's tentacles. It reminds me kind of like a Horacle cover a little bit.
Okay.
It's got those greens and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's just a kick-ass album opening instrumental. I mean, one of the best. It's killer. What they're doing here is Triumph. I said it's triumphant life or death ? Affirming metal.
Well, and then it ends with the fucking oh Jesus, what's the goddamn band? Diamond Head.
Oh yeah. That's it, man. Like he's tapped into the DNA of like traditional metal, like mixed in with all this extreme stuff going on. And I thought, the album itself, Conjuration, like opens with Deathcult, and it actually ends with a really killer instrumental as well, which you'll hear at the end of our episode. So I figured that's kind of like a good way to sort of close out, the episode, but it's kind of like bookends the album itself with an opening, like great, really triumphant instrumental. And then just this incredible, maybe my favorite instrumental of the whole band is the one that we'll play at the end. So, then it gets into a sequel, and we didn't talk about this in part 1, but there was a song we played in part 1 from the Lost Years called I, the Pathfinder. Or Pastfinder, sorry. And they kind of do like the bolt thrower thing or whatever, where I don't know if the riffs necessarily like match together, but they sort of start adding like part 2 on a different record. And other bands have done this before, right? Like not just bolt thrower. I'm trying to think of somebody else that sort of almost continued this story over the course of like several records. There's somebody like that should be obvious that we've talked about in a past episode, and it's kind of escaping me at the moment. But
that sounds like something a Monomarth would do. But
yeah, I don't know enough about Monomarth, to to care. So, but yeah, so you get Traveling Through Chaos, and this is the Pastfinder Part 2. And this one's got a lot of stuff sort of going on. It's kind of throws an ode to that Doomier style of From the Lost Years, where Part 1 was from, with that opening kind of 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And that lead from 2 to 2:30 is like just majestic and beautiful. And then it kind of rolls into this kind of, Deathcult kind of feel for like, style feel for like the rest. You get these melodious and gorgeous kind of parts interweaving with kind of shimmering riffs. There is so much Nightfall, Dark Tranquility on this, though, or Sky Dancer. And
totally.
This to me is like the ultimate. Like, it sounds like something from Nightfall.
Put it like it feels like a series of vignettes that we're trying to express the different eras of metal. Like you go to like Noabum to this melodic black metal shit into early 80s or early 90s, like Swedish melodic death metal. That's like Eucharisty stuff, and super melodramatic.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. There's just these longer epic songs. Like, I got to a certain point where like I had trouble trying to sort of track all the things, and I have a tendency to maybe over analyze things, and so I had to kind of like back off of it a little bit and be like, okay, just let some of these songs like wash over the listeners, and they can kind of, grab the things they want. We'll point out like, yeah, listen for some Dark Tranquility or listen for this Eucharist stuff. But like, ultimately, like, you got to kind of sit down with some headphones and just, like you said, this is, walking you through like the entire history of metal in like a song.
But I think the Fortress that we're going to hear is going to be so succinct that I can sum it up in 1, 2, and 3 very distinct movements.
Well, you'll have to wait on that one till after Talkset too. But okay. Yeah, I also wrote very little for Fortress for a good reason too, because I think that one will kind of speak for itself for sure. So, but let's get into it, and then we'll kind of come back and start to talk about the spell of Retribution and stuff like that. So, this is the title track from Reaching the Veil of Death, the EP that he was talking about in the Maniacs interview. And then a pair of tunes, Deathcult Arrival, the instrumental that opens Conjuration of the Spectral Empire. And then the very complex Traveling Through Chaos, parentheses, the Pastfinder, Part 2. That was Traveling Through Chaos, the Pastfinder Part 2, and Deathcult Arrival, both of those from 2002's Conjuration of the Spectral Empire. And then we kick things off with the title track from Reaching the Veil of Death EP. Kind of short set there, although that last tune's kind of long, so that makes sense. Yeah, that's a fun record, and I can't wait for people to hear the instrumental at the end of this episode that comes from that record, but because it's just a fucking banger. I have a lot to say about that song. But yeah, as we move into the spell of Retribution in 2004, after they kind of record Conjuration and they have all these troubles, as we mentioned before, with the Witch's Brew, they sign with Earache's subsidiary, Wicked World, for 2004 as the spell of Retribution. And I'm trying to think what I remember about Wicked World. What was sort of the purpose behind that? Was it just to sort of recreate the sort of death metal that Earache had kind of been doing since Earache had
I think that, I thought like Municipal Waste was on that.
Were they? Okay, I think
they started on one label and they went to Earache for one record. And I think that's after that record, like Earache just shit the bed and they were done. Like then they waited. They were just selling off legacy stuff, and then they went to that whatever fucking horseshit band they have, like Blackberry Smoke, or like they started getting this weird like Dave Matthews shit. I don't even know what it is. I just don't know. I know I don't like it at all.
I don't know what it is, but I know I don't like it. Yeah, I sort of remember what you're talking about there. I just remember it was Wicked World, like an attempt for them to try and like get street cred again, kind of, or something. I remember the label. I just don't remember what the purpose behind it was.
Or take a risk on something without having to really take a risk on something, because it's a sub label and you can always just like claim bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's true. I guess this album, for me, this is the one that I would suggest to people. It almost works best, more than almost anything else they do, as one cohesive sort of album. It's just this singular piece from sort of start to finish. It'll blow you away if you do kind of have the time to sit down and listen to start to finish. But we're gonna throw show you three highlights from it, I guess. Mm-hmm. But for me, it really just kind of polishes and refines everything that comes before it. I kind of compared this album to like it's There Somewhere in Time or Seventh Son record.
Yeah, I think that the Chasm's kind of like everything's an iteration, and they keep like refining and refining and refining. And this is definitely probably their up to this point their most refined, outing.
Yeah.
Most disciplined.
Blood, Fire, Death, Bathory epicness kind of baked into this DNA of this record.
I would say Manowar too.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Manowar, like German power metal, I think is in this too.
But you still get like the Time Heals, like Leave Scars, Dark Angel, like riff mania.
It's not just like one thing.
It's just riff fest, kind of stuff. And speaking of riff fests and blistering and speed, Fortress. That's what I wrote. Blistering riff fest that cascades into the third part of the Pastfinder with a killer solo at the end that's very Trey-ish. It's like invokes like Trey, That's all I wrote for Fortress. Just like it just rolls over you. It's succinct. It's perfect. It just sets up Retribution of Lost Years perfectly. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
Was it I put Dark Tranquility through the eye of Creator.
Okay.
Then Mayhem riff, then Chris Reifert vocals, then that fucking Slayer headbanging part.
Yeah.
Like the thrash stuff, the thrash elements are strong now. Like things are getting stripped down a little bit. There's still lots of time changes, lots of riffs, but it feels like it's really kind of like going a little retro.
Yeah. Yep. And then we get the sort of third part of the trilogy with Retribution of the Lost Years, and this is this and the next song, the Eclipse, are both like, ooh, there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, epic, majestic, doomy masterclass in musical movements and tonal shifts. That's what I said about Retribution of the Lost Years. I said I've just kind of simply run out of superlatives. You know, the only thing I can say is it sounds like Immortal meeting My Dying Bride, meeting Formula's era Morbid Angel, mixed with like newer kind of German stuff like Sulfur Eon and stuff that we covered in that German 3-parter. I said, and maybe this is where I'm kind of getting to with these guys. They sort of have those kind of undescribable sort of qualities that I hear in like newer stuff, maybe like Horrendous or like Blood Incantation, where like they're just doing what they do, but it's so unique, but yet it's also all been done. But like it just all kind of works. I don't know. Like if you were to ask me to define Blood Incantation Horrendous, I would just be like, they're good. They really do all the things I like in metal.
They take all the like the honest and unique elements of death metal and like make them into this succinct thing.
Yeah.
Because like Blood Incantation owes like 50% of their existence to, it's like half Demolish and half Immolation. And then they're like permutations of that. Yeah. But like there's a lot of American shit in that I wouldn't have really like felt was so important. Like I would never thought that a band would embrace those aspects of death metal, and that's something I would be really excited about.
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's almost like they grew up like listening to like some of the same shit we did, but then they focused on, whereas we focused on like Paradise Lost and Catatonia and Anathema and some of that stuff a little bit more. They were like more locked into like Immolation.
Yeah, the American stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Which is awesome.
It just adds a different mix because you're not just getting like copycat Stockholm bands, you know, doing that kind of, you know, HM2 kind of stuff anymore. So, but yeah, it's just like the genre mashing is so seamless that they kind of defy definition. I think that's what you really start to hear on like the Spell of Retribution record is they're just kind of like, they're at kind of like peak, you know, they're sort of just doing, they're the Chasm. That's all that they're kind of doing at this point.
Totally.
You know? And the ending solo in Retribution of the Lost Years is just godly. It's just absolutely fucking next level type stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I put great riff like Waters of Ain.
Yeah, there you
go.
From
Watain.
Yeah, which is one of the best like Watain solos. Like, you know, it's so emotive and just heartfelt and all that kind of stuff. Indeed.
But that goes into like, you know, epic solo that goes to the mournful thing, to the triumphant thing. Like this is like the formula is really being, I think, just refined perfectly at this point. Yeah. And all the rest of the songs we're going to talk about are just kind of like little tiny, like making these just a little bit better, but they're just micro refinements at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So then we get to kind of the epic tune here. Sorry, I was opening up something on my computer. I was telling Mark, my hands are doing all these things because I'm holding my mic and get sheets of paper and stuff. But this is a 3-part movement of a tune called the Eclipse, Monument to the Empire. And I think that this is kind of fun. I want to read the lyrics to this one. They're not, surprisingly, for as long as the song is, the lyrics are not that long. And the song is broken up into 3 parts. Part 1 is called Sentence and Burden. Part 2 is called The Voyage. And part 3 is called The Restitution. And I thought, we haven't really talked about Daniel's like lyric writing a ton, but he is the total package, you know, doing all these different things. I think by this point, he's even doing the artwork and the layouts to the albums too, which is kind of interesting. So part 1, Sentence and Burden, it says, in the eye of the revolutionary storm, my blazing strength is the vortex, creator of millennium chaos, and of voices of honor and disgrace. There are no words to describe this sorrow, cursed from the start and blessed from the solar wings of temptation. I want to recreate the tale of the arcane torment, to explore the land of the united light and shadows, the place the wisdom rules and perpetuates. But the sentence is way too heavy. The burden I shall carry on and on. And that is when part 2, the voyage, kicks in. Deliverance appearing in dreams, in appearances from another dimension. The extract of the fate that decided to bring me here to a place of no return, to a time of awakening, of broken prosperity, to a fountain of weathered truth and utter melancholia. This is the way of this mania, a clamor for the apocalyptic direction. And then part 3, the restitution. To the grief, to the death, to the pristine resurrection of my fortress, to oblige and pervade with glory and apotheosis. For my fevered visions of the Sith, restitution. To the grief, to the death, the frozen grief of gathered emptiness. Thought for a guy who's ESL, that's, pretty poetic and kind of interesting.
It's some of my favorite types of lyrics are the ESL lyrics.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how like sometimes the Swedish guys can like have better grasp of like the emotions of the English language or the sort of uncanny feelings, Well,
and when you don't fully understand the language as like everyday language, I think you pull in more interesting choices for words.
Agreed. Yeah, you don't make the safe choice.
Yeah.
You merge words together that normally we wouldn't do or whatever.
Or it sounds like super hyperbolic. Like,
yeah,
I like that. I like that kind of vibe.
But no, I just thought like we haven't really honed in on them very much. And this in particular, I was curious with a 3-part story what the lyrics were for this, because I have this idea in my head. When it says "Monument to the Empire," the voyage, and things like that. I even though it's like wrapped in this sort of Lovecraftian and mythological kind of lyrics in there, I think I hear some like hints, maybe, and I'd be curious what Daniel says about this. But based on some interviews I've kind of seen, some hints of kind of that New World Columbus kind of imperialism sort of sprinkled in. This idea of, he talks about the land of the united light and shadows, just kind of losing things when the voyage kind of occurs and restitution, trying to get revenge for what's been done to their land or something like that. And again, maybe I'm reading into it as a history teacher. I'm not saying that that's what I think the song is about, but I just think it's interesting, like merging of these kind of fantasy, mythological, Lovecraftian things. But obviously there's something maybe more realistic there too,
Sure, absolutely.
And I said, musically, this song, and it finally hit me, this song, it out behemoths every aspect of that band that I've admired. Like it takes Behemoth, but like it does what I want more from Behemoth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that until you said that. But yeah, I said it was almost more of like an enslaved thing.
That too. There's definitely that. Yeah. Yeah, I could hear that. I mean, I heard like even when you get like
Monumentum enslaved kind of vibe.
Oh, yeah, with the progressiveness and stuff. I need to go back and listen to that. I love that record. God, what a great era.
It's great.
Yeah, it's just there's parts of Behemoth. I know I've slagged on Behemoth before, but maybe that's newer stuff. But I like a lot of like the ideas of Behemoth. I just wish they would like do the things I like more, if that makes sense. Like
sure.
The things I really like of Behemoth is that's what I want them to be, and they just never completely commit to that stuff, especially on the newer records. Maybe.
Well, they have those 3 distinct phases of like the more kind of like primitive stuff.
Black metal kind of stuff.
Primitive black metal. Then they had like the hyper speed shit,
which is my favorite. Phase 2 is my favorite.
Okay, I like that stuff a lot, but I also really I think the Satanist is a great record.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it sums up like it's like the heartwork of Behemoth. They kind of like really refine everything.
Yep. And I see this song kind of like similar to that in terms of like the riff choices and some of that stuff. Because Behemoth is sort of like their own thing, right? They're a genre mash as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're totally their own. They used to sound kind of like Vader, kind of like fucking Dark Throne. Like they had all kinds of weird things that were happening, but they eventually like mashed it all. Like that gang vocal thing they did. They might have been the first to do that. I'm not sure, but they're the first to do it like in that level.
Yep. But yeah, cool riffs. This kind of hellish melodic death metal landscapes and a lot of cool mood changes. And maybe that's the enslaved part you're hearing for sure. The tonal changes and stuff. I mean, case in point, there's a point like around 350 where like all of a sudden Aphalamia Dominion, like galloping riff just sort of kicks in, you know, like it's total like Dominion.
They start with the hammer on, and then they start doing the gallop fucking riff.
Yeah.
Then there's like Tiamat vocals.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
It sounds like it sounds like Johann in some of those stuff.
I wish I would have paid, I think the one thing I probably paid the least amount of attention to, as I was so music focused, was some of the things outside of like the Araya screams. I like Daniel's vocals a lot, but I kind of took them for granted, and I didn't always pay attention to some of the things he was doing vocally. So I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, he had a lot of like real expressive, growly stuff. It's even a little bit later on in the stuff we're gonna do, like completely changing, like still having the growl, but more of a, I don't even know where you'd throw it in, but it almost comes in like German speed metal-ish, like later on. Except where it's that kind of like barky, like I forget what the guy's name is that came on after Udo, but he's like some dude from New Jersey that kind of sounds like Brian Johnson mixed with Udo.
Yeah, those like newer like Blood and Nations and
Blood and Nations
those are good records actually. Yeah, really nice.
But it totally has that speed metal vibe too.
Yes. Indeed. Yeah. There's a lot of traditional metal like baked into all of this kind of stuff. And then here's what I'm going to tell people, because we're about to kind of go to these trio of tunes. But when you are in this last song, like the guitar work from 7:34, because the song is like nine-ish minutes or so. Like I don't really have words for it. Like that guitar playing, like it's kind of like the solo we talked about before, like at the end of Retribution, where it's like godly, like it's just like when he locks in, as you said, sometimes a song will feel like it's over and you're like, okay, it's just going to play this repeated pattern on its way out. And then all of a sudden he's like, nope. I got more to give you, and I'm going to give you like the most emotionally like compelling part of the song right now. And you're like, Jesus, okay, here we go. So, and it's funny because this is where I wrote my comment that I said, in a weird way, they fit into death metal the same way that early metal church fits into thrash, if that makes sense. And so that goes with your earlier comment too. So
totally, yeah.
But let's get into it. We got, like I said, trio tunes from Spell of Retribution. We got Fortress, which kicks right into Retribution of the Lost Years, which is the Pastfinder Part 3. And then we end with the Eclipse, Monument to the Empire. That was the Eclipse, Monument to the Empire. Then in the middle there, we had Retribution of the Lost Years, and we kicked off with Fortress. So now we get a 5-year gap, and this is where, I was looking for interviews, and I reached out, like I said, to Brandon Corsair a little bit today just to get some insight if he knew some things. And he didn't really have insight into this era necessarily, but I mean, 5-year absence, who knows? Some bands just naturally have 5 years, but I kind of wonder if, it's some of the exhaustion of the bad label experiences they're sort of going through in the previous cycle. Some of the changing trends that are kind of happening in metal, just general exhaustion as having been in the scene for, at this point, like 25 years or so. But Corchado still kind of finds it and puts things together, and we get Farseeing, the Paranormal Abysm in 2009, and this one he's going to put out on his own label, the Lux Inframundus Productions, and he's also going to mix and produce it, as well as write, perform, do the artwork, do the layout. So the Chasm is an auteur band at this point, everybody else is there to like kind of just, it's like Brian Wilson with the Beach Boys, right? Like he's going to tell you where you're needed and stuff like that if you're in the band with him, but that's kind of, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of interesting, and we get kind of like, again, an ode to kind of ancient powers is kind of one of the themes he's kind of hinting on here, which kind of seems to be something he's deeply kind of interested in. It's almost like Morbid Angel and Trey, right? Like where Trey was always kind of talking about, some of the Mesopotamian stuff and Babylonian stuff. I feel like that's kind of part of his DNA.
The Azagothican parts of his DNA.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But the album is half instrumental. So 4 out of the 8 songs have no vocals, which is going to kind of pave way, kind of for where the current Chasm ends up, that we'll talk about near the end of the episode here coming. And in a lot of ways, I said that this album kind of feels like it's kind of like their And Justice for All, in that like a lot of it is like the crunching guitars and the killer drum work do a lot of the storytelling. You don't need a lot of vocals. You don't need a lot of bass work, obviously. And maybe it's like the production that Daniel's doing is a little more like drier, the way that Injustice is, but it still has like that sonic quality to it,
Sure.
I guess you're at a point where like, the vocals start to become a little bit more optional. And basically what Brandon told me when I reached out to him earlier today, I'll pull up his message so I can kind of quote him. He says, my recollection is that Daniel at times felt silly doing harsh vocals as a man into his 40s, already in the album before this, so he's talking about Farseeing. And, it was just a continuation of the path, which is why like their last record that they put out is all instrumental, And then he goes on, he says, well, clearly he changed his mind because shortly after they toured in like 2018, 2019, the first Chasm shows in more than 10 years, he was doing harsh vocals again. But he says, I wouldn't be shocked if the new Chasm material remains instrumental, though. So I don't know. So that's kind of, I guess that was the vibe going around, is that he was just tired of doing the death vocals, but he could still do them when he needed to. So, because I didn't know, if it was like a medical thing where his voice just was like giving out, so he wanted to kind of do something different. I had no idea. So
I think a lot of bands have gone through that, like as they get older, trying to get rid of the death vocals because they find them, kind of maybe childish or something. I don't know.
Limiting.
Yeah. Yeah. But also like that's what a lot of these guys fell in love with too. Like, Nick went back to doing it with Bloodbath and brought him back into Paradise Lost. So it's like, there's no, I think everybody goes through those phases of where they're feeling about, their artistic endeavors or whatever, where it's not necessarily like, I want something more than just what I thought was cool when I was 15. And then you get a little older and you're like, oh, okay. Like this is the stuff that really kind of like grabbed us at our souls, and there's no harm, no foul doing death vocals again.
And I wonder, I totally agree with that. And I wonder if like in reading some of those things from earlier interviews where he was so passionate and so like, it's hard to be that locked in all the time. And as
point, I mean, I've gone in and out. We've all gone in and out. Yeah.
Yeah. And he just seems like, I don't want to say defeated, because I think he still really cares about what he's doing. It's not like he's phoning it in, because he's not, especially on these last couple of records. But it's just, he's just going to do what he's going to do. Maybe he's kind of given up like on the idea that like the Chasm is going to move units. Like they're never going to be the band that they might have maybe been able to be, like if they had been on the right label. Like, I don't know, imagine if that stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s, if that stuff was on Peaceful, or, like a label that actually put some work into stuff,
they had more of a distribution through
Century Media or something like that. Like they would have fit fine on that, and probably it would have done wonders for them. But
even like Avant-Garde or something,
Oh shit, yeah, exactly. Some kind of label that can really like put a lot of time and effort into packaging and the whole vision of what they were all about. So it is kind of interesting that they're kind of heading into this direction, of more kind of progressive, more mood shifting than the way that the previous albums were already kind of leaning towards. And in a way, they're kind of like, you think of like Call of Cthulhu or Orion or To Live Is to Die, and those songs still told really great epic stories. And I think that's kind of what they're kind of gonna start do with, is like if he has lyrics, cool. If he doesn't, he'll just let the songs kind of do what they
still tell the tale. Yeah.
Yep. And I think the production on this record, on Farseeing, it's really like fluid and organic, and it feels a little bit more analog feeling. And I know he's doing the production. I don't know if that was a kind of conscious decision, but it's I don't know. I guess if you're a death metal purist, you might be pissed off, because of the lack of vocals or whatever. And also Antonio on drums, he's blasting a lot less, I think, on this record. It's a little bit more mid-paced in a way, and not saying it's not intense, but it's more emotionally intense, I guess. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
But the pair of tunes we're going to play off this record, one is instrumental, Structure of the Seance, and this has got to be one of my favorite extreme metal instrumentals of all time, just in terms of like what it does with the idea of an instrumental. Because I think so often with death metal instrumentals, I think you mentioned it before, like it was like a Morbid Angel like intro or something like that. It wasn't like a fully formed idea that he started doing on these earlier Chasm records, and here it's like fruition. Here we are. Real cool, dark, shimmering, serpentine kind of discordant stuff. Very like immolation, incantation, kind of almost along like side maybe newer Gore Guts in terms of that discordance. Yeah,
I would throw. This is the first one I wrote anything about Inquisition.
Is this Inquisition too? Yeah. You can definitely throw. They're all over this band.
It's some of those history of metal kind of like vibes where like there's almost like 7 tempo changes, like super melodic solo, Candlemass.
I hear early Amorphous too at times.
Yeah. I put hope he doesn't stop being short attention span songwriting where there's like 15 million riffs. I love that. It's great.
Yeah, mid-paced Tampa riffs alongside tremola textures from Sweden,
and then like the most emotional fucking solo you could ever imagine.
Yeah, it's just I really think he's super underrated. I don't know who rates this guy. I don't know. I know it's got a lot of fans. You read the reviews on Metal Archives, like people like
it's all pretty high on Metal Archives. There's nothing under 70.
Yeah, I was gonna say people who get this band get it. You're not like. I feel like if you're a Chasm fan, you're not half Chasm. Like you're just all in, or you're not. Like or you don't know the band. It's kind of weird. So I'm hoping in doing this episode we can expose some people who maybe have been on the fringes or haven't really known how to penetrate a band like this or where they fit in the history of metal or the context of where they came from and stuff. So, and then we get the very epic, very awesome, The Mission: Arrival to Hopeless Shores, parentheses, calling the paranormal Abysm. Holy shit. It's a lot.
We get a forward slash and a parentheses. Like this is
that's like
pretty
didn't Demolich do stuff like that? They just had like insane.
It was ridiculous. Absolutely.
Yeah. Here we get really great, cool kind of synths and atmospheric openings. There's this cathartic release after the opening where Daniel screams after like 90 seconds. And then this kind of just cool, death, doomy, phantasmagoric kind of riffs kind of set forth. I said it really evokes like early Catatonia records and even maybe stuff that like Evoken or Runes of Everest or kind of funeralish kind of stuff.
I even put like later Bathory and Emperor.
Okay, yeah. I
that kind of like
Blood, Fire, Death.
Yeah, that whole kind of like vibe.
Yep. Absolutely. The screams after 4:30, they're really fucking haunting. They're almost like grim black metal, kind of like Burzum screams or something. It's real weird.
I put it's like 5+ songs worth of riffs in one song.
There you go.
That's kind of a lot of this. Yeah. And like the term I came up with these for guys is epic doom death metal, but not doom/death. Epic doom is doom metal and epic death metal as well.
I like that. Yeah, it's like the inverses of each other.
Yeah.
I guess like, the second half of the song, it kind of builds in the second half a bit. And I said, you get like the heavier end of like My Dying Bride or like early Tiamat, maybe a little.
Sure.
Yeah, but there's always this sort of gloomy cloud that never leaves the song the whole time, and that tremola riff at the 9-minute mark, heavenly. It's just
always
it's always there. So those are a pair of tunes from that record, pretty cool. And then it's kind of after this record, which feels like kind of an explanation point, kind of on like the Chasm in a way. I mean, they're going to put out this record. We'll talk a little bit more about in our last talk set. That's all instrumental, but in a lot of ways, like if he had ended with Farseeing the Paranormal, I think people would have been like, all right, that's a career nothing wrong with that. But he's starts kind of getting into other projects. He gets into this band that is like a solo project called Magnum Interius. Jesus, I think it's Latin. And they're kind of like ambient doom type stuff where he's basically playing everything himself. And they've done 5 records since 2009. But again, it's all being put out on the Lux label. So I don't think there's a ton of distribution there.
Yeah.
And then he starts the Acerus, Acerus. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Acerus in 2012. And they're kind of doing more traditional kind of metal, power metal-ish kind of stuff.
Yeah. Except
and
worship.
Yeah, a lot of that. Yep, absolutely. And he's doing the bass and about half the guitars, at least on the debut record, which is called the Unreachable Salvation. And Julio from the Chasm is doing the other half of the guitars. And then Roberto Vale, the guy who played bass on Procession of the Infraworld, right?
Oh, okay.
He was the guy who played on one record, got homesick, went back to Mexico.
Yes.
Well, they bring him in to sing. So he's the guy singing. So the guy that played bass on the song that opened part 2 up. Yeah, there you go. Keep track of all that shit. And then, then on the second record in 2016, so that's the record we're going to hear something from, the Unreachable Salvation in 2013, the debut. But then just to sort of finish out the story on Acerus, he plays everything on 2016. All right. I haven't really listened to that record much. And then it looks like the record that they put out in 2020 called The Tertiary Rite, he's got a full band again, but I don't know who all the members are. So I didn't really spend much time on Acerus. They're not a band I knew much.
I just did that first track I listened to a couple times.
Yeah, and it's fun. I listened to a couple songs from the Unreachable Salvation. And it sounds like it's almost like he's become like Chuck Schuldiner near like the end, where like Chuck was like wanting to like do things outside of the realm of death, right? Like
it sounds like what the fuck was that band called?
Control Denied. Yeah,
this is the Control Denied of the Chasm.
Yeah, that's it.
Of Daniel.
That's
absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. That's kind of like where I just see him. He's kind of played out. I mean, how many more Chasm ideas can you do? It's not like you have anything to prove. You know what I mean? So I think he's just trying.
I thought like every song, if you took any one Chasm song off a record, you could write an entire record off of that one song. Because there's so many fucking riffs.
Yeah. You should almost use them as like starter seeds to like, fund other people's projects. Like, here, take the Mission, Arrival to Hopeless Shores, and there you go. Just make a whole album based off that, Yeah. Could be like
these are workshops for albums.
That's what I mean. So, yeah. But basically, yeah, like you said, the Order Shall Be Reestablished, which is the song we're going to hear from Acerus here. This is where I kind of said, not just accept, but this is where I hear a lot of Deceased too. It's like if Deceased made a barbarian metal record, so lots of great guitar work.
German power metal stuff happening. That's great.
Final 45 seconds. Great guitar riffs kind of happening there. So let's get into it, and then we'll sort of end. We'll come back and talk about their final record a little bit and kind of wrap things up. So we've got a pair of tunes from 2009's Farseeing the Paranormal Abysm. Sorry, I want to say Abyss.
It's not a word you say very often.
Abysm, yeah.
Abysm.
Abysm. Structure of the Seance, and then the Mission/Arrival to Hopeless Shores, calling the Paranormal Abysm. All right. Then we've got Acerus, a nice little, it will be a instant change of feeling. I'm sure you'll notice it. With a tune called The Order Shall Be Reestablished from their record from 2013, The Unreachable Salvation. And then we'll end things with Mind Domain Substance Layer from 2017's Chasm record called A Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain, Phase 1.
has been so long and my path has been so dark. Darker than I ever dreamed it could be.
That was Mind Domain Substance Layer from a Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain Phase 1. Then we had The Order Shall Be Reestablished from Acerus, and then a pair of tunes from Farseeing, the Paranormal Abysm, Structure of the Seance, and The Mission, Arrival to Hopeless Shores.
Woo! No shortage of words here.
Oh my gosh. And so, yeah, after to kind of wrap the Chasm story up here, after 8 years, they finally drop another record in 2017 on their own label, the Lux Intramundos label, called A Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain Phase 1. And it's entirely instrumental. And this is what I was referring to before, that, Brandon said, like, he was already leaning this way with Farseeing, and he just basically said, at this point, Daniel claims any further Chasm releases will be vocalless. So,
well, really, I think he took whatever would have been there for vocals, he just turned into guitar lines.
That's what I mean.
And I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a kind of different way of doing some of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he said, actually, I was going to read you something. This is from the aforementioned Brandon Corsair. And he wrote this, I believe it was for Toilet of Hell.
Yeah. Super prolific.
Yeah. And I thought his review of this album was really great. And so I thought I'd read it since he kind of helped us out a little bit. But he said, getting past the obvious selling or breaking, for some listeners, point of the instrumental nature of the album, A Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain Phase 1 is immediately apparent as a natural continuation of the sound that the Chasm guys have been working on for years. Leads battle over a variety of interesting rhythms, all in Corchado's singularly unique personal melodic style, best heard either in the later Chasm albums or in the two Acerus albums. Occasionally, these sync up in a harmony, but just as often frenetically bouncing away from any instrumental root. The guitars sometimes play seemingly unrelated leads, held together only by the bass and drumming. While at first listen, the jumps from idea to idea can seem random, there's always an instrument, be it guitar or bass, building to a transition or to a gorgeous peak. The way that Corchado layers guitar parts is inspiring as hell. It's not often that I've heard it done quite so well in any sort of extreme metal. The battling guitar work suits the completely instrumental nature of the album in a way that vocals might suit something written to have them. One guitar, as you just said, can serve as the rhythmic bass, while the others launch into a fascinating bit of technical mastery. And when they come together, it is to serve as a ground to launch off into new places. Subtle electronic effects add on atmosphere in opportune places if you listen closely enough, but never overwhelm the main instrumentation, serving only to add to the journey of the album. Though the album is fundamentally an exercise in the creation of interesting guitar-centric music, Antonio Leone's drumming is incredibly impressive as well. Simple and workmanlike where it needs to be, but jumping in with rapid fire fills when a bit of percussive insanity seemed necessary. The drumming really holds together the otherwise sometimes over the top leaps that the album makes, providing exactly the right support to make the album work, despite being both very long and without the benefit of vocals to help differentiate various parts of the given song. Yeah. He also kind of talks about that the songwriting, the album's length is broken up by the fact that it's segmented into 4 distinct chunks, referred to by the band as chapters, each with their own slightly different sonic flavor. So if you do spend some time with a Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain, you will notice that there's kind of 4 distinct kind of things kind of happening throughout this sort of journey and stuff. So it's a lot, and it's an intellectual exercise, but I think, like you said, it probably does lend itself best to not even dealing with lyrics and just letting the music kind of tell the story and do what it needs to sort of do, you know?
Yeah. Feel the feeling.
There it is. Yep. Well put. And I think, speaking of instrumentals, we're going back to Conjuration of the Spectral Empire for one of my favorite instrumentals. And I think it's maybe, peak Chasm instrumental, if you want to have that debate, perhaps. Brandon Corsair was telling me when we were talking earlier that he has just a Spotify playlist that's just Chasm instrumentals, which is pretty fun. So, but this is what closed out 2002's Conjuration of the Spectral Empire, and it is a song that harkens back to the previous record because the song is called Procession to the Infraworld. So, Jesus Christ. I found this sort of interesting, the sort of Infraworld. Where is it? Can find it. Is that it? Yeah. So no, that's not it. I'm crazy. Maybe not. Oh, yeah. So there's a book that just came out a couple years ago that people were kind of referencing from an author called Francois Bonnat. All right, kind of interesting, and it's called The Infraworld. And I thought this was really fascinating in talking about this song and about titling an album after it and all this sort of stuff. The summary of the book says, transversing philosophy and the human sciences, literature, cinema, and the visual arts. The book maps out a history where all is chaos, maelstrom, and fog. If perception and language objectivate the world, if imagination structures it, if knowledge orders it, then how can we describe, name, or even apprehend that which comes to pass when language is absent, when perception vacillates, and when knowledge eludes us? How can we say, show, or make known that which undermines and refutes the order of things, the supposedly immutable real, and the administration of the sensible? The book takes on a quest that transverses philosophy and the human sciences. So they gotta go on from there. But I thought it's really interesting that he titles an instrumental this, and that he's kind of gone into this instrumental sort of mode, and that sort of comment when it says, like, you know, how can we, you know, try and comprehend things when language is absent, when perception is gone, when knowledge eludes us. And so I feel like he's in this constant search through his music to do these kind of things and to sort of find these truths of his own meaning. You know, like you said, he kind of deals in darkness, but also like trying to understand like death and our purpose. And I don't know, it's weird. It's like kind of, you know, Lovecraftian, you know, this existential sort of stuff that like Lovecraft kind of deals in as well. And I thought it was, I just came across that book when I was kind of like, I was looking up kind of just different ideas on what the Infraworld was. I wanted to know if it went beyond just that sort of textbook definition of being in between realms. And I was like, oh shit, there's a book called The Infraworld. Interesting.
Did you never see Inframan? Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
It was a Japanese, like, basically like what they used to do on, I think it was on USA, where they would take like the Japanese, like, you know, you have 5 people come together to become, you know, Voltron or like Inframan was one of those things where he was like a motorcycle that turned into a man.
Okay.
So I guess he was Dead Man throughout, but I never knew what the fuck that was until I didn't put 2 and 2 together until 10 minutes ago. You know, seeing that title, I was like, shit. I remember Inframan because a friend of mine's parents had a video store, and we'd get just junk VHS trailers to watch, and like the Return of Inframan. It's like, oh, all right.
I just they were just talking about that in the Excalibur podcast that I've been listening to, which we talked about off mic, but basically the comic book, the X-Men kind of title, the British superhero team, with my favorite X-Men, Kitty Pryde, Nightcrawler. But there was a issue in the Cross Time Caper where they're kind of just jumping through all these things where like some of the characters are basically illustrated as like kind of like anime characters or manga characters.
Okay.
So they brought on a guest who's like an expert in that. They have like a PhD and they do sort of studies on it. And they basically talked about the history of like where manga kind of came from. And I guess like it's kind of accredited to sort of Astro Boy, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the first thing. And then obviously it came through, you know, Robotech and Voltron and all that sort of stuff into the 80s into our culture. And that's how we kind of discovered it and stuff. But yeah, it was kind of interesting. They just kind of, they might even mention that one now that you say it. I got to go back and listen. So,
well, Inframan was live action.
Oh, it was live action. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
It was like
the same concept of like different things forming together, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. There was like Transor Z in we had channel 66 was like the UHF channel that was near us in mid Michigan. It was in Flint, and you could change the top channel, the UHF part of your TV. You kept clicking until you hit 66, and you're like, holy shit! Look, why is there like Star Trek and Good Times and all this different stuff on this this station, that UHF station? Yep. That's where I found Robotech and Transor Z, which was Metzinger is the Japanese version of that, but like just all that shit. I mean, it was like almost like the internet. It was public access meets the internet before any of that shit existed. Like just old crap that you could get for cheap to fill airtime and get commercials.
And that's kind of like early cable was sort of like that. Like totally. I watched a lot of like TBS and WGN and stuff. Like why was I inundated with like the Bozo show? But like it's because I had 13 channels to watch, and one of them was WGN. So I was watching,
and that was resurrected too, like the Bozo show. Yeah,
but I was watching like reruns of the Jeffersons and like Harry Carey calling like Chicago Cubs games.
Totally.
For most of my like childhood, and it's like, why do I know so much about the Chicago Cubs? Because they were the only other team besides the Tigers that were on TV. It was just,
and the Tigers have always been a pile of shit.
Yeah, they were good in the 80s. That's when they won the World Series and stuff. But yeah, like.
Oh, okay. So that's when we got Bubba Baker. That's the only like jersey I ever had for the Lions.
Bubba Baker. Oh no, you're thinking of the Lions.
Okay. Well, Lions are still shit, right?
Oh yeah, Lions are always shit. Yes.
Tigers have had ups and downs, but they've been good.
Yeah, in the 80s they were good. Alan Trammell.
Well, even in the early 2000s they won a couple times. So.
Yeah. Miggy.
But the Lions,
they got to the World Series a couple times.
Lions have always been shit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they had a couple good seasons with Barry Sanders in the 90s, and that was about it.
But they still sucked.
Yeah. They still failed at all times. You can tell we had the Pistons a couple of runs.
Fuck, we had the Bad Boys real good.
Yep. Then we had Hockey Town, man. We had the Detroit Red Wings, so you can't go wrong there.
And we had baseball. We really had the trifecta. We just never made it with football.
Yep. That's where we always fail. So Lions are definitely one of the top 5 worst franchises in the major 4 sports.
They haven't won since like 68 or something.
No,
or before
since the 50s.
The 50s, they're that shitty.
Super Bowl era. Yep.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. So.
Hey, but we had the Stooges and Alice Cooper, so we're cool.
That's true. Yeah,
MC5,
and just all that stuff. So that's kind of where we're going to kind of close things out. And I don't have a lot. I'm not going to really say anything about this song. I just let the song speak for itself. Right from the opening galloping riff, like if you stay on board, it's a fucking killer tune. I don't know if you wrote much about it, but I just was like, you know what? I don't need to say anything. It is what it is.
I mean, it's, I've got, what is it? Chunky Weird Production. Song is like a mix of Thorns of Crimson Death, Waters of Ain, Stellarvor, Chug Chug Gallop, Epic Doom Heavy Metal.
Hey, chug gallop. I love it. Fucking if that doesn't sell you, I don't know what does. So, we have had some feedback over the last couple episodes. I want to share a little bit. A couple patrons reached out to us on the Patreon site. One is Robert Blanton, and he said, "Great job with the Dead Kennedys episode. Really appreciate the research you all put into it. The political context behind what they were doing was particularly interesting and added a lot to my understanding of the band I've been listening to for decades. Also developed a new appreciation for Frankenchrist, which was hard to get into at the time it came out, particularly to a teenager who was definitely more into the aggression than the political insights. As somewhat of an aside, I recall that Jello did an interview about 10 years ago in Decibel. The two things I remember were that A, he was a huge Mayhem fan even before De Mysterious came out. Yep. And B, he said that Slayer riffs were sped up polka riffs. Keep up the great work." Jello.
Well, I have something to say about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so sped up polka riffs. My next door neighbor, who's 81 years old, heard me playing Slayer, and he said one of his guys that's in his polka band is sick. Could you come and play with us? Because I heard you playing next door. Like it's the polka riff. Yeah,
there you are. Yeah. That's why white guys like it so much. Reminds them of the old days. So That's funny.
But I do also follow the guitarist of Mayhem, Tellock.
Yeah.
And they went to San Francisco, and they're like, hey, it's Uncle Jello. And he was hanging out with them when they came through a couple months ago.
You know, Daniel Corchado and Tellock have like a lot in common in terms of like how they think about riff construction. Because I think Tellock adds like a weird new energy to like the last decade or so of Mayhem, right?
Well, he's got that he has that total, Thorns vibe.
That's what I mean. Yeah. I think he makes some of those same kind of weird. Like,
he's about 10 years younger than all the other guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. That's a funny story.
Yeah.
This is another one from our most recent patron, Kyle from Toronto. And he says, I discovered your show in 2014 or 2015 when it wasn't active and blew through all the episodes in a few months. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and I told myself I wouldn't have as much time for metal, so I was packing it all in. Several years later, we have 3 children, and metal is a bigger part of my life than ever before, and your show keeps getting better. I guess I'm a little late to supporting you guys. Requiem is the only podcast that makes me say fuck yes every time I see a new episode pop up, and I'm very interested in each and every topic covered. Friendly suggestion, deep dives on Wild Honey and a deeper kind of slumber. All right, not opposed.
Okay. I'm
all
down.
the best, and thanks for the show. So that was a couple
thank you.
of Patreon comments. All right. Let me pull up some more good stuff here. Oh, no, that's the wrong.
We haven't talked about T-Mat in a long time.
No, I mean, we did a Tiamat episode, but, so we just did what we did, right? Kind of blew through them a bit. So
Yeah.
This is from Jeff on Twitter, who I follow. It's at MOZSab. And he's basically kind of commenting. He says, one of the reasons why your podcast is the best is he says, it becomes something of a tradition for there to be a mention of Paradise Lost or Catatonia in every episode, no matter how disrelated the subject is.
I hope so.
And he put a quote, and he goes, the bass run in this 4 Tops track reminds me of the middle 8 from Frozen Illusion. It's pretty funny. Oh, God.
100%.
People were talking about our Misfits show at the end of March, and one guy posted, Stantarium, who's a big follower of ours. He says, the at Podcast Requiem, which is what you can follow us on Twitter with, Misfits episode is also awesome. However, my wife, who is from northern New Jersey, would like to take issue with the suggestion that Lodi is some kind of upper middle class town for rich kids.
Nice.
So
I want to hear the response. Perfect.
Some controversy. And I kind of commented, I said, hey, that was Blake. He was from that area. And he goes, yeah, I know. It's just mentioning that. And then somebody commented on the mention of Ad Podcast Requiem. This is at Droid. He said, I fucking love this podcast so much and immediately grow erect when I see people sharing them. So
Thanks,
there you go.
buddy.
Yeah, that's
nothing I want to do more than get somebody hard.
That's it, man. Hey, somebody did respond. Tanner Austin says, my best buddy lived in Lodi for a long time after he married and moved to Jersey. I guess he lived right around the corner from Danzig's old house and was neighbors with Franchi Coma. I visited him once. It seemed nice, but definitely not a wealthy area. So there are people weighing in on what's going on with Lodi. All right.
Well, that might be from time to time, too. Like, who knows when these people live there, too. Like,
absolutely.
Where I live now was like a complete, desolate shithole 15 years ago.
Sure.
And now it's becoming like, you can sell your house for $200,000. It's stupid.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and who knows where the part where I can't think, Doyle and his family, like where their stuff was. They might not have been in like Lodi proper, right? Where all
I think they were very working class. But we have a different
lot of money from that factory.
Sure, right? We have a different idea of what middle class and working class is now than late 70s, early 80s.
Yep.
So it might not be as crazy as you think.
Yep. So Jeff also at Maz Sab said, it's one of the most well-researched, in-depth, enjoyable podcasts. I just finished 6 hours on the Misfits and loved it. So he was kind of just sharing that a little bit.
Thank you.
DX Ferris, who wrote the 33 1/3 book on Rain and Blood, and also did that Slayer book, the what is it called here? I think it was the Oops, sorry, I bumped the mic. 66. Do you remember that Slayer book that came out like a decade ago?
Yeah, you loaned it to like a friend of yours. He had it for
McDavitt. Yep.
Yeah, and I never saw it.
All right, well, I got it back.
Okay, I just want to see what the hell it is.
He commented, and he says that Dead Kennedys episode is tremendous. So he was a big fan. And
awesome, thank you.
He's actually wanted to come on our episode because he's a big punk guy, kind of Slayer. So he kind of comes from that kind of walk, but he's a huge wrestling guy. And he's like, if we could ever come up with I'd love to come on. He's a Pittsburgh dude. Come on and like try and figure out a theme to talking about wrestling and metal. I'm like, I don't know, maybe.
Figure it out sometime, maybe.
Yeah, but it'd be fun if we ever wanted to do just a straight up Rain and Blood episode. I mean, everything's been said about that record.
Yeah,
That's the guy that literally wrote the book on it. So
yeah, but we could also, probably add 2 hours to that.
Yeah, exactly.
No problem.
And then commenting on that same comment, Stantarium said, awesome episode as usual. I remember sitting around with my friends as a freshman in high school being like, what does 138 mean? So I'm glad that we solved that mystery.
Yeah.
Nicholas Harburg, who I believe is also a patron on Twitter, said, great episode. I just listened to the section where Glenn is talking about the San Francisco incident from that interview. He has the same speech pattern as Trump. He also doesn't believe provable facts, inserts mid-sentence that other people are to blame. It was wild. So, yeah, that's
China. There you go.
Uncle Steve's Iron Maiden Zone at Uncle Steve Rock.
That sounds like a great place.
I know. I'm fucking here for it.
Man.
He said, enjoyed the episode, guys. Thanks for clarifying the Samhain pronunciation. I heard an interview with Erie, and he said Samhain, but I know in Soul on Fire, he has always said it that weird-sounding way. He's a very interesting guy. Some comments on Instagram. Papa Tom on Instagram said, driving to New York City from Ohio, and you guys kept me company with a great podcast. Thanks, gentlemen. Keep up.
That's our favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Yep.
You want to move cross country? We're there with you.
I know. That's when I drove up to visit my folks last weekend. I finally caught up on some podcasts. Falla Hart, who is Forrest Pitts from Decibel Magazine. I don't know if you've met Forrest.
I don't know if I have
in your Decibel things, but he and I have chatted from time to time. He's a big fan of the podcast. He said, this Misfits, he says, this made my otherwise crummy day. Thanks, guys. This makes my long commutes far more welcome and happenstance. So that's pretty cool. Seth Forsman, one of our good patron friends, he says, I'm only 2 hours in to the Misfits one, and it's unsurprisingly awesome so far. This is chicken soup for a blackened soul shit here. I'm going to go on a record as one who thinks a Samhain Patreon bonus ep should be thrown into the ring for consideration. So I wonder if he didn't get to the part where we talked to Blake about coming back and doing that. So
just in the full episode.
Yep. He just said, hey, if this American punk hardcore thing keeps rolling, I have grand visions of what could potentially come next. Sorry to disappoint. We just did a 2 and done. Nolan Bradley, another one of our patrons, he's still catching up. He said, Jesus, guys, just when I think I'm going to do some catching up, he says, I finally made it to the I Hate God episodes in the Doom series.
Jesus.
Jumping around a bunch. He goes, you guys drop something like the Misfits, and I immediately have to jump ahead too. So, yeah. Kyle Doman, another one of our patrons, says, slow down. I'm still catching up on the last 2 episodes. Of course, kidding. Keep them coming. So, pretty fun stuff.
Well, fuck, we've already got another 6 hours ahead.
And then so Nolan Bradley also commented, this is from like 2 weeks ago, he says, I've been making a real honest effort to catch up on the Doom series, between them being long as shit and more recent ones grabbing my attention first. LOL. I'm finally starting to make headway. Much like anything, the bands have been hit or miss for me personally, though I have still enjoyed everything I've listened to. Whether it be historical context or adjacent bands to who was being talked about, there was always something. Listening to the Trouble episodes gave me a new appreciation for what they did. I really dug Evoken and Solitude Eternus, whereas St. Vitus and Dream Death didn't do a whole lot for me. I just finished the Winter 2-parter and didn't expect to end up where I did. The Winter tracks honestly didn't do much for me either, but when you guys arrived at Go Down, holy shit, that album blew me away. I know that was a big one for you too, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
I immediately hopped on Discogs to track down a copy and found that one was at my local store, had one in stock. I went down to pick it up, and the guy at the counter mentioned they were trying to sell it for a while now and have it and would give it to me at a markdown price. I found that to be pretty disheartening considering how good. Sorry, I lost my place. Pretty disheartening considering how good it was, and given that the Doom scene is still alive and well here with local bands like Bell Witch and Year of the Cobra. He says, I'm in the Seattle area, and I'm sure there are a lot more. I really can't appreciate enough the work you guys are putting into these episodes, especially the slog that Doom can be. And just want to thank you guys again for introducing me to new bands or reacquainting me with groups I passed on before. So
awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
What we're here for.
Good feedback. So if you have more feedback, you want to get in touch with us. If you're still like a lot of these people catching up on some stuff, we kind of gave you a spring break for you folks. We gave you an extra week because Mark went away to Florida. He got to live his childhood fantasies at Star Wars Land, and and I was actually on legit spring break, so it was kind of nice. I was just kind of visiting some things and went curling yesterday.
Fucking kids and the airports. Yeah. God, the airports suck so bad.
I am not looking forward to the Australia trip with airports with kids. It's going to be a mess. So.
It's a shit show.
Yep. But yeah, so if you we gave you an extra week to catch up on some things after dropping those Misfits and Dead Kennedy shows and stuff. So, but if you want to get in touch with us, you want to give us feedback, obviously at Requiem Podcast or at Podcast Requiem on Twitter. You can check us out at Jason and Mark on Facebook. You can check us on Instagram, Requiem Metal Podcast. You can shoot us an email, requiempodcast@gmail.com. We'll try and read those. You can sign up on Patreon to become a patron and get access to all of the bonus special episodes that we've done and some other kind of nice things. We've released some interviews with Chuck Schuldiner that we did, some live concerts from Anathema and Opeth back from 2000 or 99 Metal Fest, Milwaukee Metal Fest. Cool. Yeah, so there's all kinds of fun things there. You can go to patreon.com/Requiem Podcast, or you can go to requiemmetal.com, and you can find the first 160 episodes there. There is also a link there that you can click on for Patreon directly from the requiemmetal.com website. I still believe they can get some merch there too, can't they?
I believe so. Yeah,
I think
we've got shopping bags and shirts and all kinds of weird shit.
Yep. So I think that's something we have talked about, maybe trying to do another run of shirts down the road if people are kind of interested. So if you have feedback on that, loyal listeners, let us know if it's something you'd be excited about. So Mark's a creative guy, doesn't want to waste his time unless people are kind of down for getting some new
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that's kind of about it. That was a lot, but at the end of this journey with the Chasm, how you feeling? Good? Like
I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of band, like it's like a eat your vegetables, but man, at the end you're like, fuck. This is a band I struggled to contextualize for years, and I always wanted to, and I would dip my toe in the water and then be like, it's a lot. There's a lot going on here. And
I mean, it's one of those bands, like some of the band, I can't think of what the band was from, like Minnesota, this thrash band from the Thrash series, who sounded kind of like Cannibal Corpse. But they were a couple years
Morbid
earlier.
Saint.
Morbid Saint.
Yeah.
I remember I did all my notes. Then I went online. And I was like, okay, I got to get this record. Okay, this one's not too bad price wise, but the stuff is as we go. It's just I can't even afford to, get the shit. I got to just listen to it on YouTube.
I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so
I got that for like $24, and now it's like I can't do $144.
I know. I don't own all this Chasm stuff. I have everything pretty much from like 98 forward, but that's about it. But yeah, that early stuff is tough. The Reaching the Veil of the Death EP I think is really, really expensive too. But
yeah, it's super limited.
But so hopefully you can find some of this stuff, collectors. If you're still a CD person, or I know you can buy the Speller Retribution on Bandcamp. I did see that there because that's still the one that's under the Wicked World Earache subsidiary.
Okay.
They even had some shirts and things on Bandcamp, so I thought about picking up a Chasm shirt. Although I doubt the Chasm will get any of that money, so that I was kind of like,
I'll make you one, and then we can send Chasm some money.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd rather just like send
them $50 and
exactly. So, yeah, I'm kind of bummed. I wish he would do Chasm interviews because I think he would have enjoyed this one. Because I think he probably didn't know what we were going to try and do here. So I'll make sure to send it to him and maybe he'll enjoy it. And I don't know, maybe hopefully if you are listening to this at a certain point, Daniel, we did you proud. So we've really enjoyed all of your musical contributions. We look forward to what you got going next. So we've got Procession to the Infraworld from the 2002's Conjuration of the Spectral Empire to close things out on part 2 of the Chasm here. So for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.